In part 2 of this episode, we'll be creating the floor material from scratch using Octane nodes and finishing it all in Adobe After Effects. Let's continue creating this floor texture. First thing we're going to do is add some imperfections to this. It looks very clean, very computer generated, very perfect. Let's give it a bit more character. We're going to do that with an Octane noise. Let's bring that in there and plug it straight into the diffuse channel. That's going to override the checks that we had plugged in previously. Then, with that selected, we're going to click on UVW transform. We're going to increase the contrast all the way up there. Let's decrease the gamma to something like that. Then click on the transform node. Let's untick lock aspect ratio. Let's scale it down on the x-axis all the way down, and that's going to create these little flecks that you see in the source material, something like that. Then we're going to bring in a mix material, a mix node should I say. Then we're going to also bring in a RGB spectrum. Let's change the colour of the RGB spectrum to a dark grey. We're going to plug that into texture 1. We're going to plug our original checks node into texture 2. And then we're going to plug that into the diffuse channel. Now what that's done is, that's given us a half and half mix of the RGB spectrum, the dark grey, and the checks. But we need something to bring out those little dark grey flecks that we've created. So that noise texture that we've created, that's going to be the driver. We're going to plug that into the amount. Boom, look at that. And this is the great thing about nodes. It's just so powerful, you can make lots of changes on the fly, and it's much easier because you can see what each thing is affecting. Let's give this a bit more dirt. We're going to bring in another Octane noise. And let's bring in a multiply node. We're going to bring that right at the front here, where the mix texture hits the diffuse. We're going to plug that new noise into the texture. Now look at that. That noise is adding little imperfections to the color channel, and we're going to tweak this noise. Let's bring the gamma up so it's a lot more subtle. And we'll adjust the contrast. And we'll settle on those values. Let's unplug this roughness that we added, this node, to the roughness channel that we added last episode. And we're going to plug it into the specular. So what that's done is, you can see here in the specular highlights, it's decided what's shiny and what's not. So we're going to tweak these values. We're going to decrease the contrast. And we're going to increase the gamma. Sorry, decrease the gamma. So it's very subtle. Now if I solo this node, we can see what we're doing now. And there you can go to see that's actually what it's doing. So let's unsolo this. And as you can see, it's still very shiny, and the original source, the sauce, is looks like it's quite a rubbery texture. Let's click on our checked floor material. We'll click on the roughness channel, and we're going to increase the float to like 0.15, which is going to really roughen that texture. Now let's add a few little bumps. If you look at the original, you can see there's little bits where maybe something's been dropped onto the material and it's sort of given it a bit of an indentation. And we're going to do that with, you guessed it, an Octane noise. We're going to plug that into the bump, and you can already see what it's done with the default values. Let's make sure we've got that new noise node selected. Let's click on UVW transform again. Now we're going to click back on that noise. We're going to increase the contrast quite a bit to Something like that. Let's decrease the gamma to something along those lines. And let's scale it down. Let's scale it all the way down. There we go. Let's jump back into the noise node. Let's just play with these values until we get something that we like the look of. So I think the gamma is what we want to be adjusting. And the contrast all the way up to the top. And just something really subtle, so something like that. Now I quite like that. We haven't got too many indentations, we don't want them everywhere, but there's just enough. Next thing we need to do is create the lights, but before we do that I've just noticed that we need to move where this checkered pattern starts on the forehead. And we can do that by jumping into our transform node for our checks. Let's add a UVW transform tag. And let's bring this back up the head via the Y transform. That was pretty good. Okay, cool. So let's add the lights next, which is really going to show the details in what we've created in this texture. Let's maybe jump back 210 frames. So we've got a different angle of the head coming up there. Let's go to Objects, Lights, and Octane Area Light. Let's zoom out so we can see exactly what we're working with. So we're going to rotate this Octane this Octane light. Let's rotate to maybe that angle. Then we're going to push it all the way back. Something like that. Let's add another light. Let's click on this light that we've already created. Let's hold Control. Let's drag it forward to create a duplicate. Let's rotate it. Bring it over here. Now the first light that we created was a large light source. Now the larger the light source, the softer the shadows and the more even the lighting is. The smaller the light source, you're going to get more of a concentrated light, you're going to get harsher shadows. Let's decrease the size of this second light. And let's jump back into the camera so we can see how it's affecting this. Okay. Let's move this over. Bring it over here. That's quite nice. Let's rotate it ever so slightly so it's just hitting the temple. Bring it up. There. Let's maybe even decrease the size even more. And it's creating these highlights here. You can see sort of on the nose there, on the eyebrow there. It's still quite bright. The whole scene's quite bright, and that's because we haven't got a HDRI in there. So we're going to add a HDRI, and we're going to leave it blank, which is going to just create a black sphere around the scene. So we're going to have no external factors lighting the scene. It's going to be really dark. So that's looking okay so far. Let's add yet another Octane area light. And I want this one to, if we just rotate it 90 degrees that way, I want this one to add a bit more fill from the top. So let's lift it up here. Let's jump back into our camera. And with this new light tag selected, let's decrease the power. Let's bring it all the way down. Maybe even a little bit more. Okay, that's good. And with the light to the right hand side of the head, we're going to click on the tag for that. We're going to decrease that intensity as well, the power. Okay, that's good. And on the left hand side, click on the tag, do the same again. We're going to bring it down ever so slightly. So we've got much nicer lighting now. It's just picking up these little indentations. It's picking up little bits like the temples on either side and the nose, which I quite like. And then we've got that little flat sort of the fill light on top, which is bringing in that nice bit of extra light. Let's change the Octane camera tag. We're going to click on Enable Camera Imager. Let's change the response from sRGB to linear. We're going to change the gamma to 2.2, which is going to give us a much nicer, more natural looking image. Let's click on post-processing, enable that. And let's add some depth of field to this. By clicking on the thin lens, let's change the f-stop value to 2.4. Okay, that's looking pretty good so far. I think the next thing we want to do is click on camera imager. Let's decrease the exposure a little bit. I'm quite happy with how that's looking. Let's jump forward a few frames, maybe to 140 frames, see how it's looking, see how the light hits it. I think that's quite nice, especially for the amount of time that was spent on it. But, you know, tweak the settings, tweak the lighting, you know, change some of these node values, make it your own. But let's export this and bring it into After Effects. I'm going to bring it in as a PNG sequence. So we're going to go to Octane Render. We've got the denoise beauty pass ticked. We're going to use all GPUs. The output is going to be 1920 by 1080 at 25 frames a second. And we're going to use the frame range as all frames. So let's export that and I'll see you in After Effects. Okay, we're now in After Effects. I've already imported our T1000 scene into After Effects. What you will need to do is, once you import the PNG sequence, you're going to have to right click, interpret footage, main, and it will assume this frame rate is 30 frames a second. Now if, like me, you've been working at 25 frames a second, you're going to have to change that value. But once we've got the footage into a composition, let's press play. And you can see as this loops back around again, I've actually added a little bit of an animation of the security guard walking, which adds a nice transition to this shot. Let's correct the colours, because as you've seen from the source, it's shot at night. So let's add an adjustment layer. We're going to right click, click new adjustment layer. Let's add an unsharp mask to that. Let's click 200% so we can see what this is doing. Let's increase the amount to 101. And I'm going to play with the radius to just bring in some more of that detail. So if we go back to 100, you can see it's a bit extreme there. Let's drop the radius to about 1. If we cycle back and forth in that, it's very subtle, but it just brings in a bit more information. Bit more sharpening. Next, let's go to the color correction folder. We're going to add a Lumetri color, and you can see here we've got our scopes here, which gives us a nice reference to the color values. We're going to open up the color wheels. Let's drag the shadows down, but not to the point where it clips past this 0 value. Let's increase the highlights. And let's push down these mid-tones ever so slightly. Now let's give it a bit of a blue tint. We're going to do that by grabbing the mid-tones color wheel. I'm going to drag it down to the right slightly. And that'll give it a bit more of a blue tint. Let's do the same with the highlights. And I'm quite happy with that. And you can eyeball that, tweak it, you know, spend more time on it. But just for the purpose of this video, I think that looks pretty good.